welcome in Travis Miller from Boiler Upload. As a couple things to talk about as the Big Ten basketball schedule was released, but also football this weekend. Let's talk about basketball first, though. Both Indiana and Purdue drawing a nice card with getting Michigan State one time. Both of those are on the road for the Spartans.
Yeah, that's going to be good because I know Izzo hasn't won in Mackey Arena, I think, in like 10 years or something. And there's been he's often taken some really big losses there. I know in the one kind of down year Purdue has had here recently, the COVID year, Michigan State still came in and Purdue handed it to him in that game. That's one of the reasons that team was so frustrating because they took down Virginia pretty easily. They took down Michigan State pretty easily, and then they struggled against the likes of Penn State at home. So that'll be interesting. Obviously, nothing is guaranteed. Purdue had a 10-game winning streak at home against Indiana last year, and Hoosiers came in and flat out won the game. I mean, Jalen Hood-Shafito outplayed them. So I think it'll be good to see. I know the Michigan State game is one of the final ones on the schedule. So by then, that's one of those could decide the Big Ten games, honestly.
Absolutely. And another thing that I talked about with Bob Kravitz, who was just on with us, is in basketball, we kind of know that Purdue and Michigan State are the favorites, but there are teams, Indiana included, that we don't know what they're going to be like. We know exactly what Michigan State has. We know exactly what Purdue has coming back. We know what Indiana has coming back, but we don't know what that's going to look like. And there are other teams out there like that, I'm sure. Illinois being one of them, Ohio State. So it's always, I'm loving the way, and I'm using football as a litmus test, but there are just teams that you don't expect to be good and teams you expect to be good to not be. Alabama not having the go at it in this NIL era that you would have expected, because in what I call their own NIL era, they dominated. But some of the teams that dominated, Clemson, that dominated prior to NIL and more prior to the transfer portal. It's about the transfer portal. It's about second and third string guys on teams that are tired of sitting and are like, "What the hell? I can leave Alabama and go play in the Big Ten and start." Yeah. And so we've seen the water is just high tides are raising. No tide, no pun intended there for the tide, but high tides are raising all ships. It's been fun. I don't know what everybody thinks of what Deion's done in Colorado, but I'm enjoying the hell out of it. I watched that game last week, and it was great, minus the dirty play. Not that when I was younger, I didn't enjoy a good dirty hit here and there, but there's a line. And that safety for Colorado State definitely crossed the line. But you got to give it up to Deion also for coming out and saying, "Hey, those threats, y'all got to cut that out, man." And he's doing everything right as far as he's not bragging in the wrong way, I don't think. For one thing, it ain't bragging if you can do it. He's not really bragging. He's just saying, "Hey, here's what we're going to do." And they're doing pretty much that, which just, again, I'm enjoying that because I think that can happen anywhere. Indiana has a team. They have the talent. They should have won that game against Louisville easily. But they have the talent now, and that's simply due to the transfer portal. Purdue, I'm going to be honest with you, Purdue is surprising me. I expect a little bit more. Maybe that's not fair because it's a first year of a new coaching staff. And that obviously can be difficult, especially with transfer portal. Speaking of which, I'm sure losing key players, following Brom, whatever the case is. But the Boilers on the football field this week, they take on a Wisconsin team at home that is almost a must win, I think, for the Boilers. Otherwise, they slip down to 1-4, and that's not a good place to be after the first month of your season.
I think it'll be okay. And if you look at where Purdue's at, even in a 15-point loss to Syracuse last week, they weren't that far off. I mean, they ended up having, I believe, 5 turnovers in the game, just a spate of fumbles. There were 3 red zone trips where they came away with no points. So they were moving the ball, but they were making mistakes at the absolute worst time. I'm thinking that first drive where Purdue took it down. They had a 2nd and 1 from the 6-yard line. They got stuffed on 3 consecutive plays, turned it over on downs, and then Syracuse marched 95 yards for a touchdown. I mean, anybody is going to struggle with that. I don't care who you are. So, I mean, they're right there. They were only a play away from beating Fresno State. You don't want Wisconsin to be a must-win. It's been 20 years since Purdue has beaten Wisconsin. They've lost 16 in a row. It is the longest losing streak Purdue football has had to any opponent ever, which is pretty impressive when you consider they played Notre Dame for years. They played Ohio State. They played Michigan for years. They never lost 16 in a row to any of those 3. So I think it makes things interesting tonight. I know this is not your typical strong Wisconsin team, but they're still Wisconsin. They're still very, very good. They have a couple of good running backs that are going to run the football. Even if they want to pass more, they seem to be defaulting to, hey, and let's hand it off to the really talented running back behind 6 gigantic human beings and see what happens. And that's a successful strategy.
Yeah, and like I said, you can't. Football is the hardest sport to do it in. You've got a new staff that comes in and doesn't get to pick their roster, and you have a defensive scheme, you have an offensive scheme, and now you have to marry the personnel with that. That's difficult because coaches will recruit to what they're trying to coach. And it's going to take a year or two probably to get that set up. So it's maybe I just had higher expectations for Purdue than I should have. I didn't know enough about their roster, but they go down. They win a game on the road at Virginia Tech, which I know it's Virginia Tech, but man, that's still the Sandman, the whole deal.
That's a good win.
It is a good win. Any road win, any Power 5 road win is a good win.
Right.
And so I think the losses at home that's where I'm like, all right, they'll come. Last week I was a little more surprised because I thought they would have the progression after the couple weeks. I'm like, all right, they're going to get it going. We do a college pick 'em each week. I picked them. They've beaten me twice, man.
And last week was fumbles. You can't fumble the ball 7 times. They lost 4 of them. And you just can't do that. You're not going to beat anybody if you fumble the ball 7 times. And sometimes that's just fluke plays. I know, and then other times it just gets in a guy's head. I know I was talking to Corey Sheets this week on our podcast, and he was like, yeah, I had a year where I just had like a 3-game stretch where I couldn't hold on to the football. And he kind of saw that with Devin Mockabee so far. Mockabee has 3 fumbles in 3 games, had 2 of them on Saturday night against Syracuse. And so, you know, that's really those are just fluke plays that happen. You can't prepare for them. You can't coach them. You can't, decide in the middle of a game, yeah, you need to do this, that, or the other. It just happens sometimes. So you change that around and Purdue holds on to the football last week. I think you've got a very different game. They've got a real shot of winning it. And those fumbles took points off the board for Purdue. And even then, Purdue had the football with a chance to tie late in the 4th quarter. So I'm not too upset so far. They're at least competitive. They haven't lost to bad teams. I mean, Fresno State's won like 13 in a row now going back to last season. Syracuse is off to a good start. They've done really well this year. So there's nothing to be ashamed of with what they've done. And a lot of goodwill can happen tonight if they're able to pull off a mild upset of Wisconsin, just because it's been so long since they've beaten Wisconsin. They have not beaten Wisconsin and West Lafayette since 1997.
Whew. Yeah, that sounds like Indiana in basketball with them. It's just a stupid stat that should go away. But this is an opportunity, but because Wisconsin's kind of in the same boat. I don't know what Luke Fickell was able to hold on to there personnel-wise. He's not a running – the old Wisconsin style is not his style. Doesn't have to always matter. It depends on what your personnel is. You have to adjust anything you're doing to the personnel you currently have. So I don't know if – because Wisconsin is not exactly – they're not a favorite to win the West this year, but I'm not saying they're bad either. This should be a heck of a game, but I think Purdue is an underdog at home, right?
Yeah, they're an underdog, and they've got a couple of running backs, Braylon Allen and Ches Malusi. They're averaging about 7 yards a carry, so Wisconsin might be trying to pass more, but it seems like in the second half of games, they're realizing, oh, this isn't working as well. Let's just give it to the running backs. And that's working. Both those guys are very talented and should be able to turn up some yards. And also, what are you going to get from the Purdue defense? At Virginia Tech, they gave up 11 yards rushing. That is the program record for fewest yards rushing ever given up by Purdue on the road. And then last week, Garrett Schrader comes in and just absolutely torches them on the ground. Nearly 200 yards, 4 touchdowns, and that's a running quarterback. So, all right, what are you going to get? Are you going to get the Virginia Tech run defense, or are you going to get the Syracuse run defense?
Yeah, making a difference, like I said, as we get further into week 4 now. Indiana taking on Akron. They will finish out their non-conference slate before they turn their attention back to Big Ten play. Does Purdue have a non-con game left, or they got all 3 of theirs out of the way early, didn't they?
All 3 of them are out of the way, and honestly, the thing that gives me some hope the rest of the year is the benefit.
No, go ahead.
It's the benefit of the Big Ten West the rest of the way. I mean, they get an Illinois team that hasn't looked good. Northwestern looks awful. Nebraska doesn't look good. Everybody's beatable in the Big Ten West, honestly. Even Iowa. I mean, yeah, arguably Iowa's looked the best, but I don't trust their offense. I mean, they are a team that if you get up on them 10-0, game's over. But if you fall behind them 10-0, game's over.
Yeah, they're a 4th place team at best in the Big Ten East. Iowa, that is, all day. They play that slog mud defense or offense that just moves like a dump truck stuck in reverse going forward down a hill. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they get done. But the Purdue schedule, basketball, anything else stick out to you when it came out this week?
Not really. I mean, we knew who the opponents were going to be because I know they announced the conference opponents several months ago. It's just a matter of when it goes through. And I mean, Purdue does not get a break all season long. They've got Xavier coming in the non-conference. They're playing in the Maui Invitational that has Gonzaga, Kansas, Syracuse, Tennessee. They've got neutral site games against Arizona and Alabama. So by the time they get to Big Ten play, it's not going to be a surprise, and they'll have played a ton of big games. And really, I mean, that was the case last year. They won that Phil Knight Invitational out in Portland, beating West Virginia, Gonzaga, and Duke in 3 straight games. I mean, those are about as good of 3 wins as you can possibly ask for in a non-conference slate. So I think it just goes back to, can they defend home court at Mackey? And I am in the minority. I have often thought that winning a Big Ten regular season championship is harder to do than reaching a Final Four. And I say that because to win the Big Ten, you have to go on the road to 10 incredibly hostile venues. You have to go to Indiana often. You got to go to Michigan State. You got to go to Michigan. You got to go to Ohio State. And you've got to be able to win at least 5 or 6 of those on the road. And that's if you go perfect at home. So, that's excellence over 3 months, and Purdue has proven that they can do that under Matt Painter, and they did it last year. I think they've got a real shot of repeating this season, but like you said earlier, anybody can beat anybody. I mean, look at what Rutgers has done with Purdue. The Rutgers has been an absolute thorn in Purdue's side lately. Northwestern came out of nowhere last year and finished second, and they beat Purdue in Evanston. So, you've got a bunch of good teams that on any given night can upset somebody. And, I think it's still incredibly hard to walk into Mackey Arena and upset Purdue. But if you do so, that's going to give you a leg up in the rest of the conference.